So it's one of the great cliches of these sorts of things when you say that's an impossible act to follow, but it is a very difficult act to follow, that really scintillating, and I think what will be remembered as an important discussion between Marta Koss and Pat Cox. Marta Koss, so utterly in command of her brief, but also so charismatic. And Pat Cox as well. I'm on the record as saying Pat Cox is Ireland's answer to Jacques Delors, and I think that's fair, given his 50 years of contribution to the European project. But actually today it's confirmation he's just Europe's Pat Cox, the contribution he has made all by himself singularly. So such an honour to be continuing on from that panel. And the only way, what is it that Commissioner Coss says? We need fresh air, energy and humour from the Irish presidency. What better way to do that than just jumping straight into our panel, which is utterly expert. And people are going to come in the order I'll introduce them. I think you know Sabina Lange, who's Associate Professor at the University of Ljubljana. Very warm welcome to Dublin, and thank you, Sabine. John O'Brennan is Professor of European Politics at the University of Maynooth, one of our great universities here. And John is also a great patron of the Institute here, and I'm delighted that he's on the panel. Olena Tregub is the Secretary General of the Independent Anti-Corruption Commission, Transparency International. Delighted that you're here also, Olena. And then Wouter Zweers from our friends in the Clingendael Institute. We're going to be trying to understand provocatively, where does Europe end? What are the modalities, opportunities and threats posed by the enlargement process? And what perfect preface we just had with the Commissioner and Pat. Sabine, John, Olena and Wouter, you'll have 5 minutes each. Bit of a discussion between the group, then Q&A, and you will get your lunch. Over to you, Sabina.
Thank you very much. It's a tall order to speak now after Commissioner Koss. It's also a hard act to speak in front of the audience, so I know many learned and experienced practitioners and researchers, but I think this only speaks for a good debate ahead of us. So we were given 5 minutes, and I thought I'll lay it all out. I will have my 5 minutes for the 3 following issues, and many more will come in. The political versus technical nature of the process, widening and deepening, and ensuring cohesiveness in 5 minutes. I have a clock here. You've seen, and we've observed all in the last couple of months, actually, or 1.5 years, the changing nature from technical process of enlargement being criticized for it being too technical towards a lot more political engagement. Now, watch what you wish for. The history showed that necessarily the politicization of decision-making or enlargement has been always positive. Key word 12 years of the Irish waiting for enlargement, for example. But I want to suggest that there is a space to think about the clever combination of the two. And this one brings in also gradual integration. And the latest paper by the French and German paper shows how you can combine the technical process with political, let's say, transformation or socialization of elites. And with that, you address what research and practice has shown of the danger of reversibility of accession process, of the meeting the criteria for the accession process. I'll take the example of SEPA. It's been much talked about. So Single European Payments Area as a success, where some countries, candidate countries, have joined it. I would say it is a success in the sense that it only took 2 to 3 years only. The Albanian government put forward more than 150 ideas of such projects. We can't have 2 to 3 years for each of them. But it is faster. If you compare it to energy community, transport community, SEPA was fast. The other positive element of SEPA is, it sounds very technical, but in order to implement it, countries had to change their anti-money laundering, counter-terrorism legislation, payments legislation, consumer protection legislation, banking legislation, things that otherwise do count as fundamentals among them as well. And they went through under the radar. So there is space in the technical decision-making still to implement very heavy, difficult political files change to the acquis. And then the second one, of course, the political socialization. As I said, it will be absolutely crucial to also have this high-level political engagement, and I think we have it. And we see that the Commission is working very hard on bringing member states on board, and the recent frenzy of non-papers and the activities in TIVAT show that the Commission is being very successful in that. Widening and deepening, the worst thing that can happen, of course, is that we get to the accession treaty with Montenegro and any other countries, and then there is a delay. Average time, or the latest times for the ratifications, were about 18 months. That is, let's say, a reality. But if there are really problems, because we do have governments, plus we have elections coming, governments that bring the two together as their own safeguard. But I would just say that there is space, and especially the expert community should use that space to move towards that part of reforms of the EU that can be done without treaty change. Jim Claus has set us on course for that. I don't know, Jim, where you are. But so governance, finding within the EU those elements that can make us more effective and efficient without treaty change will then also allow for that staged reform, as we saw it last time. It didn't happen all at once. The Treaty of Lisbon was reformed 5 years after enlargement. 2 years before we had, or 3 or 1, we had Nice Treaty. Before that, we had Amsterdam Treaty. So there were stages, also unsuccessful one with the Constitutional Treaty. So not waiting for after. In the Balkans, there's this saying, autumn potom, very elegant for, we'll cross that bridge when we get there, but autumn potom. There are parts we can do now, and those parts that we can do later. And last comment, ensuring cohesiveness. Commissioner said economic convergence will come. And here I'd like to say 2 words on the project that Think Europe, where I work, does together with the Vienna Institute for International Economics. The project's name is Converge to EU, and we track the living standard of the candidate countries in the Western Balkans and pre-candidates in the Western Balkans in 8 categories, more than 40 indicators. And we look at where they've been for the last 5 years, how they moved. And then we simulate what will happen in case of various scenarios of future EU relationship of these countries to the EU. And what we found out, and I can elaborate on methodology and results later, but 2 points. 1, simple single market integration won't bring much. It has been already so much used. These countries are so far integrated already with trade and economics that simple single market integration will only have marginal benefits. What will have incredible benefits is financial flows. I read again, sorry, Jim, for name checking you twice, but 8-to-1 is the ratio of the money flowing into the member states in comparison to what goes to the candidates. And fully associating candidate countries to, let's say, the MFF, or considering them more, would actually bring that change in cohesiveness, which then, of course, would also eliminate or reduce the fears in the member states by the citizens, but of course that disparity, and it's enormous now. These countries are at around 30 to 40% of GDP of the EU. Ireland was at 64 when it joined, and it was considered extremely poor. So there's really an issue here in convergence, but allowing them to join to the instruments would speed up this enormously. And last point, not EU can do everything, or EU cannot do everything. There are elements in societal transformation that EU doesn't have any competence in, but the member states can do and engage bilaterally and work with the countries, work also with civil society, with experts, to actually help on a number of issues that will contribute to convergence, such as those indicators in the area of education, health, social affairs. So member states in hand with EU, combining political and technical decision-making and doing as much as one can before actually changing the treaties.
Fantastic. Utterly comprehensive inside no time at all, Sabina. So thank you very much. Straight on to you, John.
Thanks indeed, Barry. I want to begin by doing what the Commissioner did, separating herself out from her job. I will say that as somebody who has worked on enlargement policy for about 30 years, as an Irish citizen, the citizen of a country that joined the European Union as its poorest and most peripheral one in 1973, I don't think I have the right to say to an Albanian colleague or a Moldovan or Ukrainian colleague that they don't have the same right to do what we did when we were in a very similar position to them. Mm-hmm. I'm just going to make 3 points. That's the first one. The second one is to say that the European Union, I think, ironically, at the point where it had achieved something of real importance, which was the 2004 accessions, began to go cold on the idea of further accessions. I think this dates back to the constitutional treaty negotiations around 2005. There was a loss of confidence, and we began to hear arguments for the first time about why we might be reaching the limits of expansion. I didn't feel that was the case, but those arguments only grew in importance over the years. And afterwards, what followed, I think, was a very schizophrenic approach by the EU to the Western Balkans in particular. Enlargement effectively went into the deep freeze. Remember that these states were promised membership in 2003 at the Thessaloniki European Council Summit. A quarter century later, some of them arguably are further from membership than they were 20 years ago. We have to ask why. There is no doubt that the Russian second attack on Ukraine helped to revitalize the process. And it is wonderful to see a commissioner who is possessed of energy and ambition and dynamism. I have seen every enlargement commissioner since the late 1990s. She's by far the best. And that's important at the point of time that we're at currently. But how do we get to the point where I think we need to be? Well, firstly, we have to acknowledge the mistakes. The European Commission is asleep at the wheel, mostly, while Orban was accelerating his abuses of power, the same after 2015 in Poland, and there were other cases in Bulgaria and Slovakia and elsewhere. And it is actually the Court of Justice that has recently affirmed over and over again the importance of Article 2. So we have to acknowledge those failures, and we have to acknowledge, I think, that those failures could have been addressed if there had been sufficient political will. Remember, Fidesz remained a member in good standing of the European People's Party until it self-excluded in 2020. That was 10 years after the abuses of office actually began. So I think we should acknowledge that, and I'm coming to my final point about the French, German, and Benelux proposal about safeguards, that if the rule of law machinery was made to work inside the European Union, there wouldn't be the need for the kind of large-scale safeguard measures that are now being talked about. Remember, in 2023, when the European Council Summit was about to open negotiations with Ukraine, the 2 days, it was the Wednesday of that week, the European Commission made the worst decision, in my view, that it has ever made in its entire history, to give 10.1 billion euros back to Orban on the basis that Hungary had actually done what the Commission wanted. Every EU law expert around said this is not true. And in recent months, the Court of Justice has argued that that decision was illegal in European Union law. That was exactly the right decision. But again, it is the court that is upholding Article 2 and the rule of law. Institutions have, especially the Commission, have a prime responsibility towards it. On the proposal for safeguards, yes, I think there is a case for it. And I think there is a case for graduated integration. I understand all the fears that candidate states have, especially if you've been in this antechamber to membership for years and the ground rules keep changing. So you could interpret this latest proposal as just another effort by France and Germany to change the ground rules and to make it more difficult, when in the case of Montenegro especially, and in enormously difficult circumstances in Ukraine and Moldova, there has been genuine and real progress made. But I would say to the candidate states that even if you're unhappy with the direction of the conversation in the European Council, you should take what's on offer, because you're going to get about 2/3 at least of what you actually need to succeed within the European Union. And given the kind of incrementalism of the integration process anyway, it will not be too long before you get to the point where you have full voting rights in the council and representation and so on. 10 years ago, I had a different view of this, but I think now it may be the only way to actually make this happen, that some form of graduated integration may be necessary.
Phenomenal. We're building up a great head of steam, and we're going to head straight to Olena.
Yes, good afternoon. Happy to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I'm Ukrainian, and obviously my position would be a bit different from all other speakers, because we are the country currently at war, and we see things differently. And I just want to give you one quote that just happened last month. Probably didn't pay attention to this, but in Russia, journalists asked Putin, everything happening in Ukraine, where did it all begin? And he answered, with Ukraine's attempted accession to the EU in 2013. So my point here would be to say that my position is that EU should treat Ukraine differently, because integrating Ukraine, it's a matter of basically existence of the EU, survival of EU. Russia has the goal to destroy the EU, and Russia will be working in that direction. And Ukraine currently has the strongest army in the whole Europe. Ukraine currently developed its own strategic autonomy, I would say, that European Union still building currently. Ukraine is buying European Union time to prepare its defenses for potential aggression against EU country, which in my opinion may happen sooner than we think. It's absolutely a plausible scenario. And this is why I think that for these geopolitical security reasons, it's very, very important for the EU to integrate Ukraine as soon as possible. And I mentioned that European Union currently understands that there are external forces working against EU. It's not only, unfortunately, Russia. There are other countries that don't like EU. It's China, and currently, as we spoke, even Trump administration as well. But when it comes to Russian threat, we know that Europe depends on the United States in terms of defense right now. Europe has very serious gaps in their capabilities to defend itself. I'm talking about nuclear capabilities. I'm talking about intelligence, satellite infrastructure, strategic aviation, even the simple fact that in Europe they don't even make ballistic missiles, which are necessary to intercept Russian ballistic missile. It's a very simple thing. Europe doesn't have any of that, and Europe is very worried about this. I go to a lot of European gatherings where they speak about how many years they have. Do they have 3 years to prepare for potential war with Russia, or they have less than that? So all these conversations about how Europe should prepare, how Europe should stay close to US in order to make sure that if something happens, US will come to help. I think in those conversations, it's important for Europe to look at Ukrainian experience, because Ukraine is a country that was begging for help for the last 5 years. A lot of weapons that Ukraine was asking were never delivered to Ukraine, for example, German Taurus missile. But Ukraine managed to build up its defense industry. We now have new 700 companies that make drones. Now, in the recent months, the tide has turned and we are actually winning back our territory. We developed mid-strike capabilities where we paralyzed Russian military logistics, which prevent them from actually attacking more territory. And at the same time, we developed our own long-range capability where we're able to hit deep inside Russia, to hit their oil refineries and so on. And I think it's important right now for Europe, first of all, to look at this, to understand what's going on actually at the periphery of EU and how dangerous the situation is. This war is very close to spilling over the borders of Ukraine and Russia only. Already it is happening. Drones are hitting EU countries, Romania, Poland, and so on. And the longer it lasts, the more likely it will spill over. And it's important for Europe to understand this. And it's important that Ukraine becomes the part of Europe that will be defending actually Europe. Ukraine is already defending Europe actually without being EU member. And it's important that certain timeline is given to Ukraine. Our politicians were stating 2030, but EU did not really approve that timeline. I think that it's very important now to have this clear date, because as a member of Ukrainian civil society, I can tell you that indeed we are, as Commissioner Kost stated, I think we are the strongest civil society, if not in just Europe, in the world, without exaggeration, because the level of influence of civil society in Ukraine is unprecedented. For example, we created Anti-Corruption Council of the Ministry of Defense, where part of our members, just civil society, elected representatives by people, they received clearance to state secrecy. They are able, for example, to monitor and oversee defense procurement. This does not exist in any democracy. It's unprecedented. Our civil society also was very, very instrumental in defending Ukraine. Not many people realize it, but even this whole drone industry that is now so developed in Ukraine and became the global leader was brought by civil society. And it's actually civil society who were procuring and building up drones up to 2022. And only then, after full-scale invasion started, the state adopted it. And civil society does a lot of other things to defend the country and to build strong democratic institutions, rule of law, justice. And where European Union is very important is to help us build institutions. Because Ukraine is a very powerful country in terms of power of its people, very, very strong people, very strong organizations. But in terms of building institutions, Ukraine is lacking. And this is where European Union is strong. And this is where it would be really great if we have very strict conditions. No, we are in 2030, and I'm sure it can be done. And that's basically my position. And I think that Ukrainian democracy will be the guarantee for EU to keep prospering, to keep developing. And my final point is that for people like us, Ukrainians, joining EU, it's not even about prosperity, because you spoke here a lot about prosperity, economy, and so on. For us, it's about security. It's about life and death. And we see membership in EU is a certain security guarantee that Russia will. And we see also that in EU will become much stronger together with the EU, so that we will deter the aggressive regime which exists on our borders. 83% of Ukraine to be in the EU. There is a strong push even from all our people in the army. More than 1 million Ukrainians fighting right now. They all fight, among other things, for Ukraine to be part of Europe, not Russia. Thank you.
Really sobering and really urgent depiction, I think, Olena, which we'll come back to, no doubt, when we get to the Q&A. So thanks a million. And our last formal speaker, Wouter.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, final speaker, always difficult, but let me chip in with a few thoughts on some of the dynamics within the European Union, between the European Commission and the member states in the past few weeks and months. But before that, thank you, Barry, for the invitation. It's a great conference so far, really excellent. So thank you for that. I also second almost all of the points on Ukraine. Perhaps I may slightly feel different about the idea to provide timelines from the EU side, but perhaps we can discuss it later on, because timelines can also create some frustration if they are not proved not feasible in the end. Anyway, so I think the dynamic that we see within the European Union in the past months is interesting, because it's about innovation in EU enlargement for a long time, but sort of a think tank or expert-driven debate almost, right? With all the ideas about staged integration, etc. We all know them. We've all read them. Well, this year we're seeing this new interesting dynamic where the Commission at some point proposed this reversed integration model for Ukraine, which the member states quite frankly rejected end of February, early March. But then Commissioner Kos, who was just here, of course, she told the member states, well, then come up with your own ideas. Come on, we cannot, there's no time to just sit and wait. We need some fresh ideas for how to move the process forward. And that's where some of these member states non-papers perhaps also come from, starting with the letter from Friedrich Merz on associated membership for Ukraine, which came a bit out of the blue, I must say. I think many member states were caught by surprise, and it wasn't. Perhaps it would have worked better if it would have been a bit more coordinated. But at least that was a first step. Then the Germans, I think, realized that something needs to be offered then also for Moldova. And is it that boring or no?
Not at all.
For Moldova and the Western Balkans. And that's where the French-German non-paper comes in from a few weeks ago, which is interesting, I think, because it doesn't really propose a methodology change, but it really does focus on optimizing this political and sectoral integration during the accession process. And I think that's exactly what's needed, because so far the whole gradual integration idea has been sort of limited to the roaming and the SEPA discussions, and there has been really an urgent need, or at least I've seen the urgent need to broaden those discussions and to get some concrete ideas on in what fields, in what sectors, and in what formats political and sectoral gradual integration can move forward. So I think that's a really welcome non-paper that was also really welcomed at the EU Western Balkans Summit in Tivat in Montenegro, for example. And it asked for removing some of these procedural veto points in the process, which I would also say is a really important point, because it's high time. It should have been done already in 2022 or earlier on. Sending a letter to a candidate country even requires unanimity after already a decision has been made. So these kind of things just we need to get rid of them to really prove this sort of self-EU proclaimed momentum that there is in enlargement. Well, and then the last one is the Benelux, Germany and France non-paper from earlier this week on the new accession treaties. I want to discuss that one in a bit more detail, because of course it's a good sign that member states are already putting on ideas on the table for what the accession treaties should look like. It shows that we're in a new stage of enlargement that I think this was unthinkable a few years back. At the same time, I feel that this non-paper perhaps has a bit of an overly focus on risk management. I'm not sure if you can manage each and every risk that is there. It spells out so many options for transition periods, safeguards, clauses, etc. And I think, of course, accession treaties should have strong safeguard clauses on the rule of law issues, because we've seen how much rule of law regressions can harm the European Union. But at the same time, I'm missing a little bit the true spirit of European integration in this non-paper. If you look at the labor migration point, for example, it says that we may want to research extending labor migration limitation transition periods, that could be a solution. I think if you really want to have true integration and joint economic development and already from now on, then probably instead you want to have a proactive labor migration policy cooperating with candidate countries to create already some sort of legal or circular pathways for labor migration that would already help today the economies of both the candidate countries and the member states, and not only when you have a country exceeding the EU then saying, well, for the next 10 years we cannot have any labor migration. I think limiting the voting rights for new members, that was also listed in this proposal. I don't know, I think it sends a bit of a wrong signal, especially because it sort of works around the real problem. I don't think the EU has a real problem with enlargement. I think the EU has a real problem with itself and with its own democracy and its own rule of law. And probably, therefore, what you want to do is to really move the debate forward on the EU reforms themselves. And I'm a bit concerned that now the enlargement debate is moving forward, but we still haven't seen the policy reviews from the European Commission. Half a year ago, they were promised already on EU internal reform, and it's always easier for member states to basically discuss among each other to limit voting rights or limit other rights for candidate countries than to look each other in the eye and to try and find some real solutions for the problems the EU is facing internally. So let me probably end with with a conclusion, like, are all these proposals a sign that enlargement is really moving forward? I think it's a mixed answer. Yes, it's good that there are proposals from the member states. There is merit in some of the ideas. I think for the accession treaties, let's not only focus on risk management for new candidate countries, but to really focus on this idea of sincere cooperation that's actually referred to also in this non-paper, and to really take on this EU reform debate itself and take the next step there. And I think this also closely resonates with what you, John, said. So leave it at that for now.
Thanks a million, Wouter. In case any of you didn't notice in those 4 short remarks, we just covered an absolutely vast amount in such brief form. Institutional reforms, a special case of Ukraine, managing expectations of accession countries, stableocracies, political and technical reforms, widening, deepening, cohesiveness, and much else besides. So breathtaking and excellent. Thank you very much. In the interest of time, can I get a sense of how many questions? Yeah, as I thought. So I'm going to come to you really quickly, but what I want to do, and it'll become less relevant as we move up the group, just because Sabina, you went first, John, you went second, I invite you to respond to anything that went after you. You can pass, then John, Olena, and then I'll go to the group. Sabina, about a minute each if you can manage it.
I wanted to comment on the timing and the need for reform, but then Wouter was pretty much in line with what I wanted to say.
Cool.
I noticed the stark difference between the commissioner saying 28 by 28, but then whenever she refers to anything in the future and the need of new Ukraine that's asking for the date, then there is this, we can't go that, it's not on us, it's on you. It's a lot more on the member states as well. I mean, it's on both. But I agree that it is it's impossible to make promises, and we've seen in the event of North Macedonia how devastating for a country can be if the promises can't be met. So I would just say I understand that the difficulty here, but what I'm more worried is the coupling of certain new countries with others, and we still have member states that believe that some have to enter first, while perhaps not having a solution for those. And John was very clear about the problem in Serbia.
Cool.
And on the need for reform, just one element here, I really think we should go in stages here, because there's also this thing about reforming and then presenting the new members with, this is what you're going to join, without giving them the opportunity to also a bit co-shape where they are, the community in which they're going to join to. When in the previous big bang enlargement, the candidates were made part of the Constitutional Convention and they could, be informed, they could inform. So there was a very good process. So once they joined, they could also reshape and kind of felt really that this is the community they joined to. I would just kind of notice this. And one last point, Ireland did that in 73. It that we joined the community, we didn't reshape. So we're going to be introducing some innovations here. And what the first thing you did in the presidency first day, you invited the commission over.
Look at that. John.
Slower scale.
Thanks. I just wanted to say one last thing about rule of law. The Commission every year now publishes a rule of law audit on each member state and each candidate state. And the analysis of experts looking at these reports is that up to 90% of the recommendations are not implemented by the member states. That's a real problem. A year ago, I was on my way to Bulgaria. A week after I arrived, the mayor of the town, which is the size of Cork, was arrested by the Anti-Corruption Commission, which is itself the most corrupt body in the country. And we could go around different member states and you get a version of that. Second thing is that a lot of this is very familiar from the 2004 accession period. Back then it was Poland. The French fears were all centered on Polish agriculture. What happened? The CAP was revised, the cohesion process was revised, and Poland actually transformed itself economically. So it was no longer one where you had a 25% agricultural sector and workforce. And it became much more diverse. And anybody who travels regularly around Central and Eastern Europe for the last quarter century, you can see the material transformation that has happened as a result of membership. It's undeniable, as it is in Ireland and in other places. So there's a lot here that I think that is familiar from past accession rounds. The new geopolitical context is different, but there is nothing that we haven't actually tackled before as a European Union, even in the case of Ukraine, which presents a different set of challenges. I'm parking the issue of the war and compensation for damage and things like that. But on its own, the Ukraine also actually points us to another part of the neglected enlargement discourse, which is what the candidate states bring to the European Union. Olena quite rightly points to defense and security, extraordinary capacity for innovation. And it's not just those particular sectors. It's also about how the government keeps functioning in the most difficult kind of circumstances. Ukrainians have proved that over and over again. So I think we should also be asking questions about what the candidate states actually bring to the European Union.
Absolutely brilliant. Olena, do you want to respond to anything Wouter said?
Yeah, very briefly. Yes, European Union, somebody said that European Union doesn't know how to do geopolitics, right? So there are geopolitical players in the world, China, US, Russia is attempting, but EU, they cannot because, yes, they don't have this autonomy. But my point is that with Ukraine, they can have this and they should become a geopolitical player. And Ukraine is a place now where a lot of geopolitical interests are clashing. You come to Kiev now, there are American venture capitalists, there are representatives of the Gulf states, and they are all trying to, invest in defense tech and so on. And American would even say, we want to buy and invest all these companies before you become member of EU, because once you become member of EU, there will be a lot of bureaucracy and regulations. So we need to come in quick and now. So there is a geopolitical competition going on, and that's my point. It's a completely different angles from what we're discussing here, but this angle is very important. And another point is that Ukrainian people, Ukrainian civil society, they know much better even than EU about the different violations, different corruption cases that are happening on the part of Ukrainian government, and they will not let it happen. They had last summer, we had young people standing in the streets of Kiev demanding the independence of the anti-corruption bureau. It's because Ukrainian people have desire to make their country democratic and establish rule of law. And they need more support. Ukrainian people, Ukrainian organizations need more support. And this support can be provided institutionally through EU integration.
Phenomenal. Thank you so much, Lena. Is there a mic? Paul on microphone. David's there, is it?
Barry.
Wouter, sorry, you had your chance, you see, but can you be really quick because we have a lot of questions.
I just want to very shortly second the point from Sabina, giving the candidates the opportunity to impact also the EU reform processes. I want to expand on it a little bit. I don't think they need to be a member state for that, right? They can already get them into those discussions from today onwards. And actually, I think there's a real task here also for the expert, the think tank community, because we quite often ask candidate countries representatives about the accession process and the internal reforms. But we need to ask them more questions about how do you see the issue of QM3, qualified majority voting in EU common foreign security policy? How do you see the reforms of the EU rule of law instruments? How do you see the future of the European External Action Service to get out of that enlargement debate? Because I think the situation now with a country like Montenegro really requires us to take the next step and treat them also as almost human.
Phenomenal. Thank you so much. Going to start with Erwin 4 over here. I'm going to take this gentleman here and the man next to Bobby, your second round, Bobby.
I apologize in advance to the panel for asking this question, which I had hoped to put to the Commissioner, but there was no time.
Yeah.
So one of the issues that has not been raised yet today, even though it has undermined and continues to undermine the credibility of the EU's enlargement agenda, and that issue relates to bilateral disputes, of which there are quite a few in the Western Balkans, and where some member states have used their veto power to introduce issues that have nothing to do with the accession criteria, such as history and identity, in order to block individual candidate countries. And Sabina mentioned the case of North Macedonia, which has been waiting now for so long. And the Commission, for some reason, you noticed the Commissioner, I know she didn't have time, but in the Western Balkans, when the President Cox invited her, she only mentioned Montenegro and Albania. No mention of the other countries. It's a little bit like a black hole. And it's unfortunate that the Commission still has not come forward with any initiative to deal with these problems of bilateral disputes, to put them in a separate area so that they don't contaminate the enlargement process. I would hope that the Irish presidency could perhaps use the opportunity to do like it did during the Irish chairmanship of the OSCE in 2012, which was to invite
You have to wrap up a little bit, Erwin, please, if you don't mind.
Yes, okay. Well, then I leave that.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
So anyway, bilateral disputes is something that really needs to be dealt with, and the Commission cannot ignore this forever. And it's another argument to strengthen the importance of simplifying and reducing the veto power of member states.
I hate to rush people, especially Erwin, former EU Special Rapporteur to Macedonia, so an authority on the subject, but we're against the clock a bit. The staff are preparing food, so a colleague from Egmont and then the colleague next to Bobby McDonough.
Thank you very much for taking me in that order. I'm a little bit more successful in that session than in the previous one. I will now come with 3 comments, and just only comments because unfortunately I'm going to have to dash out immediately afterwards. The first one would be to congratulate and thank you very much for this very successful conference. Having organized such a conference myself 3 years ago, I understand what the challenge it is, and really you are making it. Second comment, it has to do with Ukraine. I would refer to what Marta Kos said. She said, okay, Ukraine is a country which is still at war. So I would maybe encourage ourselves to take the question the other way around. Okay, we are all supporting and aiming profoundly attached to the idea of a lasting and sustainable peace in Ukraine. What does that mean? We don't know. My benchmark is to say it means a solution that will be deemed to be acceptable by the Ukrainians and their government. But there is one thing which is for sure, is that this agreement will include something related to the relation between Ukraine and the EU. You remember this famous 10 points draft agreement that was dumped by the Americans with the idea that Ukraine should become a member of the EU by 2027. We all laughed at it, but it is going to be part of the deal. It is going to be part of the deal. So the question for us now is not how and when, us being the EU, the question is, what are we willing to bring to the table to put into the basket of an agreement in terms of future relation between Ukraine and the EU? I think that we should approach the question that way instead of setting deadlines and then apologizing because these deadlines will be met and creating, I would say, nasty feelings. My last point would be about your comment, Wouter, concerning the last memorandum of these 6 member states. A colleague of ours published recently a paper in Brussels, which was entitled Accession Without Ratification. Because we all have to be aware that at the end of any accession process, even for little Montenegro, there is a ratification treaty that has to be an accession treaty, that has to be ratified by 27 member states. If there is one accident in one member state, then game over. Then game over. So, and we know that the support of public opinion in all our member states, even for little between quote Montenegro, will be of the essence. Right. Then from that point of view, I can understand that some member states are keen to have this kind of rather defensive, call it belt and braces approach in the treaty in view of being able to sell them to their public opinion and to, I would say, the political landscape in the government at the time the agreement will be submitted for ratification to the national parliament.
Thank you so much. I've forgotten your first name, forgive me. Jacob, thank you, Jacob. Jacob from CEO, right?
Congratulations, Barry, and to the panel for a fantastic discussion and a fantastic morning focusing on enlargement today. So I agree that enlargement is existential for Europe, and I think it's unfortunate that not all Europeans realize all the implications of that, and I would argue is key in that respect. Now, I have 2 short and easy questions to maybe Olena first, because this has to be conditions-based, it has to be reform-based. What are actually the capacity and the capacities of Ukrainian authorities to reform, which is actually directly linked to my second question, which has to do with the political support of the member states, apropos recent proposal during the war this spring, and apropos the comment about ratification. And that maybe goes to Sabina and the rest of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd say we're going to have a chance for 1 round. So Bobby, hang on to the mic. You could put your question briefly, and I'm going to give you each a chance to respond to the 4 questions. Bobby.
Well, thanks very much, Barry. I was just going to ask about the security guarantee that membership of the European Union would provide that Olena mentioned. I mean, if there is a peace deal, which we hope there will be, to what extent would EU membership of itself provide a security guarantee? I mean, there's other things like Article 5, and there's Europe building up its defense, and there's a backstop, maybe military, boots on the ground in Ukraine. But somebody whom I greatly admire and who's very knowledgeable said to me recently that they thought that the simple fact of membership would itself be a very major security guarantee. What do you think of that?
Thanks a million, Bobby. So I'm going to go in reverse order, please. Wouter, Olena, John, and Sabina. Do your best. Pick as many or as few as you wish.
Perhaps on the bilateral disputes question, I think, yes, the EU needs to have a lot of attention for that. I think especially where own EU member states are involved, there's a real role for the EU to put real pressure on that member state. And for Ukraine, when we were talking about opening the accession negotiations or giving the candidate status, then the other member states sort of forced one member state out of the room to make sure the decision happened. For North Macedonia, I never saw something like that happen. So I think there was more room for political pressure than that was exercised in the case of North Macedonia. Having said that, for a case like the Serbia-Kosovo dispute, I think the EU has already tried a lot in a way, and there it may be quite difficult to come up with fresh and new ideas. So the only thing you could hope for is that if accession really moves on with a country like Montenegro or so, that then also changes like broader dynamics in the region. I think to now try and get these two parties around the table again for a constructive dialogue will just remain very, very challenging.
Phenomenal. Olena, do you want to pick up any of the questions?
Yeah, sure. On security guarantees, there is no such thing as a 100% security guarantee. Article 5 of NATO Treaty is not 100%. And there is Article 42.7 of the EU Treaty that is about common EU defense and security policy, which is very similar to Article 5. But it's also not a guarantee. But the point is that if Ukraine becomes a member of the EU, basically for Putin, it means that he would need to give up. Because he's currently fighting for Ukraine not to become a member of EU. He knows it, he said it. And once Ukraine goes to EU, he understands, and I think also the guarantee is that Ukraine will have more access to joint projects, to resources, to develop together with the EU the defense posture, to develop this deterrence. And that would be security guarantee. Ukrainian army is security guarantee, the best trained army in Europe currently, Ukrainians, plus our new technology, that would be our guarantee. And we can make this all happen much, much better if we're a member of EU. And the second question, capability, whether Ukraine can adopt all these regulations, definitely, easy. Ukraine is a very dynamic, very agile, very innovative country, and very fast. In Ukraine, if you have like business, can we meet, you call them at 12 o'clock at night, and can we have meeting at 6 a.m.? And they will show up. That's how Ukraine is right now. So you shouldn't believe that they cannot adopt the strategy for anti-corruption, as currently we're having some issues with that. We currently have issues with reforming our Prosecutor General office, our Constitutional Court, and other institutions. It's a matter of political will. It's very simple. And if there is increased pressure from society, and that increased pressure from society will come if they know that the prospect is real, then pressure will come and they will do everything practically like overnight. That's what I can say.
Thanks a million, Elena. John?
I want to take up Erwin's point, and I want to absolutely agree with him that the intervention, the unilateralization of the enlargement process that we've seen over the last 20 years or so, it's very different to how it was previously, where the member states trusted the Commission to manage the process on behalf of the Union. And then they did come in where necessary, where their national interests were at stake. Pat referred to the Copenhagen European Council. That was a very good example of the way it used to work in 2002. We've been in a very different space since. The very obvious dispute is Bulgaria and North Macedonia. I say to my Bulgarian friends, what you're doing is wrong. Firstly, that the issues which are around culture, identity, language, and history, they have no place in the accession process. And number two, Skopje is going to be one of your closest friends inside the European Union in the future. So you shouldn't be wasting all this political capital on these disputes. But it points to the wider problem that, and you could see it with Orban, the moment he succeeded in his extortion act in December 2023, a few days later, he was back blocking the loan that was proposed then for Ukraine, which of course he went on to then agree to and then oppose before he was turfed out of office. So I think that's a really big issue, and I don't think there is any political will to tackle it. And the other one that counts here is ratification, which our colleague referred to. One of the things I really fear is that we're going to see France, for example, hold a referendum. And I am not sure how any country, this is really relevant to Ireland because we have to hold referendums on all constitutional changes in Europe, not on accession treaties. But how do you win an argument when the information landscape has changed so much over the last 20, even since the last time we held a referendum in 2012? Extremely difficult.
Phenomenal. Sabine?
Michel Barnier showed that it is possible to work the member states. There is something to learn. There are best practices need to be adapted to. But France is an issue, especially with elections and so on, and the rules they have on 3/5 and so on. But I think there is a movement there. They nominated a couple of years ago the special envoy for the Western Balkans. They have a new strategy. The envoy is now in the running, potentially without support for the office of the OHR. And I think he shouldn't get support because he's started doing a job in France. But I've also seen subtle campaign in France, also in the Netherlands, on getting citizens familiar with the countries, not yet talking about enlargement, not yet talking about the politics, also not talking about what this will mean in terms of economy, but still stressing, Giselle in the recommendations, and the team wrote about this difference between the geostrategic argument that comes from Brussels and the economic and purse argument that people feel at home. But I see the change in talking about the positive aspects of the EU, and the Commission mentioned that. She said, talk about the positive aspects of the EU. Austria has shown that, and the Eurobarometer results showed what it means. Celebrating 30 years in the EU, talking about it, and suddenly, I'm not suggesting there's a direct link, but you can see the Eurobarometer results on support for enlargement increase. When you're more happy being where, you also don't mind others join you. So I think we see elements of that, but there will have to be push. And as Wouter said, the expert community can really help here, design support, not strategies, communication tools that will target where it needs to be. Very briefly on bilateralization, I think we have a problem in the relationship between the EU institutions and the member states. This is changing, and I have a feeling that currently the Commission doesn't have credit to spare in working on the member states. And it will have to work on the member states to get support so that the member states work between themselves. I don't think the Commission is at the moment in a position to work on a member state to pressure it. There was space, but at the moment I think perhaps the last breath of the Macron presidency could be this reversal used for that. The other issues within the CFSP.
CFSP, you can finish your mark. One sentence to close the scope.
And I think Irish experience in mediation, very welcome views under the radar in the very technical negotiations here.
Phenomenal.